Okay, well, thank you for being here.
Thanks,
I think a good place to start probably would be on a topic that you've spent a lot of time discussing, which is climate change and sort of the way we should approach that as a state. And so maybe you could describe for us your priorities in that area, and maybe also, while you're at it, talk about your nonprofit that you're running, the Full Circle Fund.
Sure. Well, it's the crisis for our generation. We had a climate debate. We had 500 people show up, which I think showed the importance and the urgency with which this district views the issue. And it was actually, the debate was at my daughter's high school, so it's particularly poignant for me because I'm doing this for them. And I quoted how the Native American proverb that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children, right? And so I'm running to be not just a good vote on climate change, but to be the environmental and climate leader in the state Senate. And I deeply believe that California is the hope, not just for our country, but for the world on this issue. So in my answers, I'm focused on what can we do about our emissions, which are 1% of global emissions, but also what can we do that will have an outsized impact on emissions throughout the world. And that's why I take this issue very seriously. I came up with a very comprehensive climate plan. I don't know if you guys have a copy of that. I have one for you here. But it covers everything from our government operations, right, leveraging the procurement power that we have as a state to both buy clean energy and buy electric vehicles, preferably from companies that are cooperating with California and not with the Trump administration, but also set a market for things like carbon-negative building materials, carbon-negative cement. Secondly, transportation. We've done a good job of electrifying our grid. What we've not done a good job of is plugging that transportation sector into the grid, right? So our emissions from cars are actually increased rather than decreasing, which is one of the reasons we're not currently on track to meet our 2030 goals. We're just not on that track right now. Third, buildings. Proud to be on the board of Menlo Spark. We have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. And we passed the first fossil fuel-free building campaign in the peninsula, and then have helped lead a regional campaign in 12 cities, including Palo. Did that last year. We know there are 14 cities that are on deck for this year. And I think that shows that we need to set policy from the state, but also how cities can lead. But ultimately, we believe we can cut about 90% of our emissions from buildings. Fourthly, ag tech. We can do agriculture in a way that actually sequesters carbon. There's some incentives put in the federal farm bill, and there's some things we need to do here that I write about. And then clean energy innovation. So both clean air, banning these two-stroke motors, so leaf blowers and lawn mowers that are estimated to have more particulate pollution by 2030 than all cars on the road, or to cause more particulate pollution. And then investing in clean energy and spurring innovation. And that's a deep topic of mine, having been behind some great innovations in the area. But when I talk to my friends in Sacramento, like Henry Stern, who runs the Natural Resources Committee, he said, we can't wait for having me up there because that's what they're trying to tackle now. The governor just put forward a $1 billion green revolving loan fund. He put forward a $4.7 billion climate resiliency bond, and it's all these things that I care about. So as you mentioned, it is an issue I've worked on for much of my adult life, starting out started out knocking doors, both in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania on the bottle bill, and then to reduce toxics. And then in Washington, I was advised to EPA and DOD. We started the first ever Clean Air Marketplace conference for EPA back in 1991. And then I worked for a congresswoman who was on the Powerful Energy and Commerce Committee. When I came out here, got involved in the innovation side, but I also started Clean Tech and Green Business Leaders for Obama. So I have a lot of background in rallying people together to support innovative policies, and that's what we need here in California.
What regulatory or legislative role should Sacramento play in requiring some of these changes on the part of residents of the state, such as conversion, which some of these cities have done to require development to include all electric appliances, water heaters, furnaces, that sort of thing? Where's that line between appropriate state mandates and decentralized voluntary efforts by both local government and citizens?
Well, the state has a big role to play, and it's not just energy, also in water as well, as meeting with Bosco, which is is our regional water representative, and we talked about what the average Californian uses as compared to other people in the country. And it's substantial, the reductions that we've gotten, and that's because of, in many ways, it's personal behavior, but also requirements that we set from the state. And we've done the same in efficiency. So I think the state has a big role to play. In many ways, yes, we do need to support innovative technologies, especially in areas like cement, which is 7% of the world's climate emissions. But in many areas, we know what to do. It's just about commercialization, right? And driving adoption. So we have incentives then around electric vehicles. But again, we have to be smart. We have to bring the rest of the state, 50% of whom live on or make, I think, $25,000 or less. So we used to have incentives for hybrid vehicles, and then we said, no, only for electric vehicles. Well, these people that are commuting 2 hours a day from San Joaquin Valley, 75,000 people every day, they're unlikely to be driving electric vehicles. They might not be able to plug in. So we want them to have hybrid vehicles. We want them to turn in their cars that are having 12, 13 miles a gallon and upgrade. And so the state can incent that. So whether it's energy efficiency standards, there were days, in May, we had 200,000 megawatts of clean energy that they just wasted from the grid. They just said, we can't use this. If we had intelligent building design, which is something that Sacramento can help do, then we could really match that load with the needs of homes better and plugging in cars better. So there's a lot that Sacramento can do. But again, we can lead here in this area as well. I mean, Palo Alto with its utility in Santa Clara led with the idea of municipal power, and now we're seeing that, I'm sure we'll get to PG&E, but we've seen the CCAs now take over some of that role, and the state can learn from that.
Are there others in the legislature with expertise in this field, or is it mostly scattered into the for-profit sector and nonprofits?
There are some. So I mentioned Henry Stern. Henry Stern was actually an intern for us at Clean Tech for Obama back in 2007, and then he worked for Fran Pavley, who wrote a lot of the pioneering legislation we have, including our cap and trade system. And then he ended up running and winning Fran Pavley's seat. So he's one of the leaders. Obviously, Jerry Hill, our own state senator, has been a leader, particularly on the PG&E issue. So we do have leadership there, but we don't really have anyone who has my breadth of experience with the nonprofit sector. We'll talk about the grants we've done through Full Circle, through the private sector, and through the government sector. And I think we're going to need all of that to really lead and really ramp up what we're doing.
Do you favor a carbon tax in California?
A carbon tax is the most efficient way to go, so I would support that. Right now, we're working within our cap and trade system. Cap and trade has actually been responsible for very little of our carbon reductions. Estimates are, I think, around between 5 and 15% of our carbon reductions have come from cap and trade. Cap and trade is expected to contribute a lot more to hit our 2030 goals. And by the way, I learned a lot of this from people in this area. That's one of the reasons that I'm running, excited about getting up there, is to translate the experts that we have here up to Sacramento. At Stanford, for example, we have tremendous experts, and I worked with someone who worked with the IPCC. Of course, we have Chris Fields. I met last week with Arun Majumdar, who created ARPA-E. This was the effort to say we have DARPA to support advanced projects in the Defense Department. Let's do that same thing in the Department of Energy. Stephen Chu, of course, our former energy secretary. So we have all these experts here. But anyway, so what I learned from them is only about 5 to 15% has come from cap and trade. So cap and trade, I think, can be that vehicle, but we're going to have to tighten things up to really get a carbon reduction impact from cap and trade.
So speaking of energy, you mentioned PG&E. What should be happening with PG&E right now? What involvement should the state have?
Yeah. Well, I like to say that PG&E has disproved the old adage of too big to fail because they are too big and they're failing. And once again, Senator Hill's done a tremendous job leading on this issue and holding them accountable. And what I hear from him and other folks in Sacramento is really three things. One, the governor has given them a hard deadline by June 30th to come out of bankruptcy. And so we'll see if they make that. And he said that as a hard deadline. Second is, what would we want this to be? Right now we're in a position to say, what do we envision this to be? I am a big fan of exploring some kind of co-op or municipalization. Again, we led the way here, again, in Palo Alto and Santa Clara municipalization, and there's many rural co-ops that we talk to, and they say, yeah, we can actually do things more efficiently. You don't necessarily have to worry about us, right? And so, but there's a financial question, right? Do we have the financial resources there to actually buy it, to actually take it over and to execute. And I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but I'm certainly a fan of, and I would be involved in exploring municipalization or a co-op model.
When you say municipalization, at a local level, that would involve the local distribution and management, but who runs the grid?
Yeah, I mean, so we could turn PG&E into a poles and wires company, and I think there is precedent for that, and I think that can work. But again, that's where all the specifics. I think we now have about 4 or 5 months to figure that out while they figure out if they can actually emerge from bankruptcy. The last piece is the power shutoffs, and there's a lot of outrage. I was outraged. Is this a third world country? The wind blows. We got to turn off power for everyone, and upset that PG&E did not make even if you look at San Diego Gas and Electric and all the things that they did after the big fire that they had in 2007, and PG&E didn't make those changes. But what they're doing now is going back and actually using data and looking at each one of the power shutoffs and saying, was this one warranted? Was it not warranted? Should it have been smaller? So we can provide more feedback to them. I don't think the state necessarily wants to be making those decisions, but I think the state wants to be providing feedback to PG&E and saying, hey, that one was unacceptable, right? And there's no reason you had to turn off such a large territory for such a long time. And the last thing I'm a big fan of microgrids. So, PG&E, not surprisingly, has blocked microgrids. And we had some legislation last cycle, and I think I would be involved in new legislation on microgrids to make them easier. And I think every city in our district needs to have one public building that's set up with a microgrid, so we have a place to go in case there are more power shutoffs.
Can you just briefly explain what a microgrid is?
Yeah, microgrid.
That's not the same as these community power agencies.
It's not. It's a microgrid is sort of, as you think from the name, it's not dependent on a larger grid. So it's a self-sufficient unit, right, with its own power generation, its own
small area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so we've seen that up in more rural areas. But what I'm saying is I think we should have them for each municipality here so that we can protect them in case of a power shutoff.
Is that generally through solar then?
Oftentimes, yeah.
So turning our attention to housing, of course. Wanted to touch base with you on your stance on SB 50, both last year's version and how things stand right now. Yeah. What's your take on its effectiveness, what's in it, and whether you support it?
Yeah. Well, I raised a lot of questions about the original version and didn't support the first version, and here's why. We do have a deep problem on housing. I mean, just recently I was with a bunch of faith-based groups, and we were at a mobile home park in Sunnyvale, and we happened to have a teacher from Alto who had been teaching for a very long time, and she'd said that she told us that she couldn't afford to buy into that mobile home park, right? And they had brought it home, to all of us. And so we do need to take substantive action. But I am cautious about state preemption and top-down solutions from the state. I think we need to do two things. One, we need to plug the leak, right? So we have sort of a disaster unfolding, and like I said, we're sort of a boat that's drowning. And what I mean by that is we've simply approved way too many jobs and not enough housing to go along with it. So these well-paid tech workers are pricing out the nurses, the teachers, the mechanics, the park rangers, others that make up our dwindling middle class here. And so the first thing I say is we have to plug the leak. And by the way, I was looking at some stats of this and just, to see, because I've talked about this for a while, but let me just actually see the data. And how big was Facebook, 10 years ago, right? And you look, and it was in 2006, 150 people. Today, 40,000. Google was 17,000 people in 2007, not that long ago. And then the latest data I saw was from 2015, and it was 75,000 people worldwide and 20 to 30,000 people in this Bay Area. So again, this is not a new issue for me. When I started Full Circle, which is a grant-making group I started 19 years ago, that's really had, I'm proud of the work we've done. And I won the Jefferson Award for that, which is a public and community service award. But when we started it in 1999, we started with affordable housing as one of our 3 focuses because we saw even back then the impact that the tech community was having on housing affordability. So the proposal that I've said is if you're a company with over 1,000 employees, for every job you create, you should have to fund a unit of housing. And I recognize that's not going to solve the problem, but it's going to keep it from getting worse. And I think in general, the tech community has benefited greatly from this region, and but has contributed to the transportation and housing issues, which are our two biggest issues, and needs to step up more. Secondly, I do believe we need a massive investment in affordable housing. We lost redevelopment. We lost a big source of affordable housing. In many cities, I mean, Mountain View is zoned for about 60% growth, but cities zone, you still need to make it affordable for people to build and to encourage them to actually build affordably. So some things that I'd like to see, we had only $80 million in the state budget for a low-income housing tax credit. David Chu has led that effort to get it to $500 million. The governor has approved it as a one-time last year, and then one time it's in the budget again for this year. We'd like to see that as a permanent source. Second, I think the city can be a friend, the state can be a friend to the cities, right? Ultimately, it's going to take dollars from local dollars, regional dollars, state dollars. But I think the city can be a friend to the city. The state can be a friend to the cities and say, for example, for every door that's built, the impact fees are generally around $150,000, sometimes $175,000 a door. Impact fees that cities need for schools, for parks, for roads. But the state could say, hey, if you're building an affordable housing developer, low-income housing or for the missing middle class, we will backfill those fees. Developer, you don't have to pay those fees, but the state will then backfill those, so we still get the amenities that we all want and need locally. So I do think there's a lot of things that we can do. As a big supporter of Measure A, and the work we did at Full Circle led to Destination Home, which is very focused on housing and homelessness, and was a supporter of Measure A. We've done a lot of innovative work, but there is still more that we need to do. One thing that I wrote an op-ed about, and now there's just another one just written the other day. I wrote mine with Joe Ross on the San Mateo County Board of Education, is that there's between San Mateo County and Santa Clara County, there's $45 million a year in excess property tax for our county boards of education. As individual school districts, we get to keep that. As counties, we don't right now. It gets swept up to pay for the court system, of all things. And that's money that could be used for, say, teacher housing, right, or an equity fund here. So I think there are a lot of innovative things that we can do, outside of SB 50, which I think has been sucking up a lot of the oxygen.
So I want to circle back on a couple of things you said.
Yeah.
First of all, what are you supporting the current version of SB 50 with its amendment?
No, I haven't. Well,
still opposing.
Well, first of all, it's a work in progress. So when it's finalized, I'll have a final position. But
I think we can see where it's headed.
Yeah,
here.
I've not supported the revision certainly yet. What I get confused about is, first of all, we need solutions for low and middle income housing now. When I read the bill, it's by basically July of 2021, the Housing Department, HCD, will define what goes into local flexibility plans. And that was the big revision to create local flexibility plans. So by July of 2021, a year and a half, they'll actually tell you what goes in local flexibility plans. Then presumably the cities will have 6 months, a year, I don't know how long, to actually develop local flexibility plans. And then the state has to see if the people actually comply with local flexibility plans. So by that point, you're talking mid-2023, mid-2024, and I'm sure there's going to be lawsuits. So I don't see how the revision really helps.
And then if I understood your point about the state potentially backfilling the cost of certain amenities of developments,
yeah,
I assume that the point of that would be to lower the cost to the developer.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
But if the homes that they're building are either sold or rented at market rate, how does that help anybody?
Yeah, well, that they would only...
It becomes a cost-payer expense instead of the developer.
Well, the idea is they would only backfill it for housing meant for lower income or middle income residents.
Okay, so it would be an incentive.
It's an incentive,
to take that off the backs of the developers
who are
they're building
yes,
targeted affordable housing.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the housing experts I talk to think that would really help.
So a related topic is homelessness.
Yeah.
Polls at #1 concern for residents of the state. So the governor and state leaders have proposed many different ideas for this crisis, from mandating cities to shelter the unhoused, Medi-Cal funding used to pay for housing. What are some of the ideas that you particularly feel strongly about that this is a real key to making some progress in housing 150,000 residents in the state?
Yeah. Well, I'd say first, and as you said in your op-ed, this week, we need to treat this as a public health emergency. And I'm glad the governor is treating it as such. I'm very proud to have the governor's endorsement and support. And I think the reason I have the governor's support, as well as a lot of local city council people, as well as the president of our Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County and such, is because they've seen me bring people together and collaborate and get things done. And the governor, I partly got to know him through work that Full Circle was doing, but also supporting Project Homeless Connect, which was an innovative effort that he launched as mayor. And so anyway, I'm glad to see that he's focusing as a public health emergency, and I think that's what it is, and we have to treat it as such. We have the issue locally. It plays out a little different in our city than in San Francisco. But here we have the issue of RVs, which I think you also took up in this op-ed. We do see some cities stepping up, and I agree with you. I think Palo could do more than what was just agreed to in terms of safe parking. Again, not a solution, but it's something that we need to do now, right? We have issues now. We got to solve the problem now. There is a tax that we put on about 1% of incomes over $1 million that's meant for mental health. Darrell Steinberg, when he led the state Senate, he put that in there. He's now leading a committee that the governor's put together on this. And they've said, you know what, we don't think that money's actually being spent effectively, or not all of it's being spent effectively, and we could use some of that money to address this, because a lot of the homeless, not all, but there is a lot of mental illness there. And so it's about $1 billion a year, as I understand, and some of that could be used for permanent supportive housing for the homeless. And in addition, the governor put a lot of money in the budget. So I do believe it's a public health crisis. I think that cities have a role to play. But I think innovation also plays a role to play. At Full Circle, we gave a grant early on to Downtown Streets Team, which is a model that started here in Palo Alto and was so successful. It's gotten almost 1,000 people into permanent housing, almost 1,000 people into full-time jobs, that has spread to 15 cities in the region. I mean, there's no greater success than that when other cities say, hey, we want this program too. And I know in San Francisco, they're trying to expand it very rapidly. So again, I don't think everything has to come from Sacramento. And I think there's a role for innovation to play. And that's why I'm very proud with Full Circle, and you go to fullcirclefund.org to see some of our grantees. But for 19 years, we've been funding innovative nonprofits like Grid Alternatives, like New Teacher Center, like Downtown Streets Team. And I think, again, not all the good ideas are going to come from Sacramento. In fact, a lot of them are going to come from this district, and I want to help take those ideas scale. I'll tell you one funny story. I saw Thomas Friedman speak at the Climate Summit last year, and he said, I see my role as a translator from English to English. Right? And you guys probably feel that same way sometimes. And so I thought, I was like, God, that's kind of what I want to be. I want to be a translator between Sacramento and Silicon Valley, right? And we need translation both ways.
So one of the likely recommendations of the Steinberg Commission on Homelessness is going to be to impose requirements on local municipalities to provide shelter and safe parking facilities. Is that something that you would support?
I have to look at that. I've heard some rumblings on that. I'm not sure what that means, and I'm not sure what the effect is without money or resources or help to come along with it. So I don't know. If it's just sort of a mandate and there's no resources or ideas or...
Well, I think some resources come along with it, but the notion is that you want to spread the responsibility out and not have some cities leading the way and basically then attracting more homeless to those cities because of the services that they're providing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fundamentally is a good idea. I know in LA, for example, navigation centers have been very controversial, and their equivalent of navigational centers, they said, we're going to put one in each city council district. So it's like, it's not going to be one district's going to have 10 and the others going to have 0. And so I think that we do need collective responsibility. And so maybe that's a step in that direction. But I haven't really looked at what the real proposal is yet.
I know the one concern of yours is affordable health care for all.
Yeah.
And so the governor has proposed that the state get involved in making its own generic label for drugs for lower costs. Is that something that you support?
Again, that's something I have not gotten to the details of. I mean, I'm open to it, certainly. We need to do something. Again, it's where California can be a leader, right? That's why I'm excited. It's only 40 state senators. We can help lead, and I'm excited to work with the governor. I think he's doing a lot of innovative work and a lot of innovative ideas, and so I certainly think it's something that we need to look at. We need to look at our Medi-Cal system overall. I mean, on the one hand, we pay family practitioners way too low. People go into family practice knowing they're going to make less than a specialty. And right now, and people don't really realize this, at least when I tell people, what we reimburse them to see a sick kid is less than many of us would spend for a haircut, right? I mean, that's what's really shocking. It's like in like $20, it's in that range. And so, I think that's just wrong. At the same time, we have, 50% of our resources being spent on 5% of the people. And again, some of those people have long-term health needs and they require that. But we have been able to identify super users, people who are in and out of the emergency rooms at $50,000 a pop. And there are some pilot programs to make them healthier and also save us all a lot of money. So I do think that there are some innovative things we can do, and this very well may be one of them. But I think we also do have to look at the system and what we're paying. I've spent a lot of time in the Central Valley. I was a founding trustee of UC Merced, not because I'm from the Central Valley. I just felt that it was kind of the big strategic bet that we need to make as a state. It was the poorest part of the state, lowest college attendance rate. We said, you know what? We open up a world-class UC there, and we're going to transform that region. And also, by the way, provide more capacity for all of our students for the UCs, which we've increased in-state residents in the last 5 years, which is a positive trend that I would like to see continue. But we'll be up to 10,000 students by the end of this year, and it's thriving. And anyway, I spent a lot of time in the Central Valley, but we'd love to do a medical school in Merced, and that's not going to happen till many years, but we have a real provider shortage there. And so, we need to look at, what we're doing really across the state.
And I believe you're on record as supporting Medi-Cal for all undocumented residents.
Yeah.
Age.
Yeah, and the work that I've done, I mean, certainly starting with yes, I'm on the record for that, but also, certainly starting with the governor's now doing with the elderly population. These are, the average immigrant comes in when they're in their 20s. So the elderly that he's providing care for now, these are people who have came in generally when they're in their 20s, have worked their whole lives, and I think it makes sense that we care for them. Also, we did the work, and I wanted to sort of see what these numbers were. And what do undocumented immigrants pay into state and local taxes? And the number that I got back was $3 billion. They do get some services for that. I don't say there are no services, there's schools and other things. But they pay about $3 billion in state and local taxes. And that's not dissimilar to the estimates of what it will cost to actually provide care to them.
I want to ask you about campaign finance reform. You're, at least until tomorrow, when the new reports come out, you are the biggest raiser of money in this campaign, which translates to you'll be the biggest spender in all likelihood. Have you put any constraints on your fundraising criteria in terms of who you will and won't take money from?
I have.
What about the pricing of Senate, a state Senate campaign?
I have put constraints, but just to correct one thing that you said, just because I'm the biggest raiser does not mean I will be the biggest spender. We have a lot of candidates as raised who are self-funding. One candidate put in $350,000 plus, another put in $200,000. I'm very.
It's not a shirt, but I'm willing to bet you that you'll spend the most if you've raised the most. But
again,
anyway,
but those are significant. But so I'm very proud of the fact that I have by far the largest number of contributors. And I think that shows strong grassroots support. So I've not put in a dime of my own money. This is all money raised that I've raised from the community and others who have seen me work over the years. But yes, and very little of it's from Sacramento, right? If you look at my, where my money comes from, very little of it is anything Sacramento sort of special interest. So, but yes, I'm not taking money from the oil, I'm not taking money from payday lenders, which is a big force in the state and something at Full Circle we've really worked to reduce and fight payday lending. So there's a number of areas that we've said, I'm just not going to take money in those areas.
What about real estate interests, or what you take from any unions that want to give you money?
I have a small amount of union money and probably a small amount of developer money. So I haven't said no to those interests at all. It's not, but it's a small sense of part of my overall money I've raised. And
what do you feel about further steps to try to control the?
Absolutely. Support 100%. Having been in politics, I'm also the only one that has national experience in this race. So I worked in government at the local level, and I'm currently a county commissioner for child care and early learning. I've worked at the state level. I've been on a state board now for 7 years. I'm on the California Workforce Board. Jerry Brown appointed me there. And I worked at the national level, and I was a staffer on Capitol Hill, and I was a press secretary, which is, a role you get to see a lot in DC, and now running myself, and everything you hear is true in terms of the amount of money, the time people spend raising money and things like that. And I've been fortunate. I don't spend as much time, I think, on call time as others, because I do have a wide network, and I've run before, and a lot of people wanted to support me, so I can spend more time knocking on doors and less time making phone calls. I should probably spend more time making phone calls, but the point is nobody likes to do it, and so I support any and all efforts. I've been proud to be a big supporter of the Disclose Act, and that's really been led by this community. And it started out with disclosing on on ads, and then we had Social Media Disclose Act, and now the Issues Disclose Act, and keep getting more and more. And I've been working with them and helping them ultimately get towards public funding.
Maybe just a couple of last quick questions.
Okay. The unfunded pension liability.
Yeah. Okay. Slipping a few easy ones at the end.
At the very end.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Do you feel the state's doing enough, putting enough aside for paying that down currently? Or?
Well, we're trying to make up for lost time. We didn't always have realistic realistic return expectations, which led to some of this. I think the governor has done a good job. I spent a couple weekends ago with 45 school board members, and this was a big issue for them because Jerry Brown really pushed that obligations to them, and it's sucking up more and more of the cost of what they can spend. And when Gavin puts $1 billion in that liability, it has a market impact on what they have. The pension liability, I think, from 16.5% to 15.5% of their budget. So, it might not seem like a lot, but I'm sure it's a lot to them. And we need to keep doing that, especially when we have a surplus. Let's use that surplus this is a perfect use of surplus funds.
AB 5 has been an attempt to reduce the number of independent contractors. It's creating a lot of problems. Did you support AB 5? And if not, what are you going to do to correct some of its impact? Yeah. Well, my sister is a freelance journalist, and I know, and we talked about it during the process, and I know it's had a big impact on freelancers in the media, and also I hear a lot about in the music business and other industries. So, listen, it was well-intended. I mean, if you just remember the origins of the case, it was the Dynamex case. Dynamex was a company that fired all of its employees and rehired them as contractors, and the state Supreme Court just said, wow, this is crazy, we have to step in. And it really was the state Supreme Court, not the legislature. The legislature really codified what the state Supreme Court does. So I think there's a balance. I mean, there's been a huge spike nationally in the gig worker economy, and these are people who don't have benefits, and they often don't have worker protections, and so I am very concerned about that. But I think there's a balance in some of these industries that there's some unintended consequences.
The reform of Prop 13 with a split roll, is that something in your favor?
Yes, it is. And I did this analysis when I ran the first time, and showing that it used to be that more property tax revenue came from corporations and less from residentials, and now it's 2/3 residential and 1/3 corporate. And so that shows it's really a fairness issue for me. I mean, I think we do have to work to protect small businesses, and I know they're retweaking it right now. But in Menlo Park, when I did the analysis, there's the Dragers and Trader Joe's, and one of them is paying 7 times the property tax as the others, and it's they're 2 blocks away, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And we need more stable sources of revenue. That's why I'm a big supporter of an oil extraction tax. We're the only oil-producing state in the country does not have an oil extraction tax. And those are two taxes that would help level out our really cyclical, historically cyclical, and it's hard to remember when we're up and to the right for the last 8-9 years. But historically, our top line goes like this, and it's because we're very income tax dependent. We don't have more stable sources.
Would you support lowering the cannabis tax to address the black market?
Yeah, I don't.
Instead of plaguing that.
I probably would. I don't know exactly what. I haven't dived into. I don't know exactly what it is now and what level would really reduce that black market. But I think clearly it hasn't worked as intended. And when you be a pioneer, I mean, we're not quite a pioneer. We followed a few other states, but we need to keep tweaking it so it works. And if there's a huge black market, it's not working.
Okay, I think we have run out of time. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.